Welcome back to WAC, or Wide Angle Conversations, a visual media podcast hosted by Rosette Simitian and me, Stacey Barron. Today, I'm joined by Bowen Du, an English PhD candidate here at UC Davis. He is currently writing his dissertation on the relationship between Asian racialization and the reception of Asian religio-philosophy in the U.S. Bowen's an excellent scholar and writer, and we're really excited to have him here today to talk perhaps about his maybe second favorite Michelle Yeoh movie behind only Transformers: Rise of the Beasts. And that film today is Everything Everywhere All at Once. Bowen, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. And I have to say, I love Welcome Back to WAC because it rhymes, and that's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to say that every time.
Yeah, I think that will be the new introductory line.
Good.
Okay, so I'll offer a quick synopsis of the film if I can. Released in 2022, directed by the Daniels, Daniel Kwan and Daniel Scheinert, Everything Everywhere All at Once. It's a kind of like surrealist, absurdist, sci-fi like venture that explores the concept of the multiverse, among many other things, right? It stars Michelle Yeoh in arguably her second greatest performance of all time, next to Rise of the Beasts, of course.
Have you seen Rise of the Beasts?
I actually haven't.
You must.
It sounds like
She
should.
voices this, Transformer eagle thing, and it's beautiful.
See, I thought, is she only the voice?
Yeah.
Okay. See, I thought maybe, I should actually watch it in preparation for this.
You should have.
Yeah.
I think we're going to really miss out on a lot.
Yeah, I really have no authority speaking on, whether that is, a great performance. But I would say according to you, perhaps that was her greatest performance in that film. So Michelle Yeoh, starring as Evelyn Wang, a Chinese-American immigrant whose laundromat is being audited by the IRS. Evelyn's family relationships are troubled, right? She's distant with both her husband, Waymond, played by Ki Hui Kwan, and her daughter, Joy, played by Stephanie Hsu. And she has a tense relationship with her own father, who's come to visit. So in the midst of these strained relationships, her meeting with the IRS takes a turn when Waymond's body suddenly becomes inhabited by Alpha Waymond, a different version of her husband from a parallel universe. He takes over Waymond's body through what is called verse jumping, or accessing versions of oneself in or from other universes. So through Alpha Waymond, Evelyn learns of the existence of the multiverse and of its potential destruction at the hands of Jobu Tupaki, who's essentially her daughter, Alpha Joy, from the Alphaverse. So pushed beyond her mind's capacities by Alpha Evelyn herself, the version of Evelyn in the Alphaverse, Jobu's mind had splintered under the stress and now threatens to destroy the multiverse with the creation of a black hole-like singularity that she calls the Everything Bagel. Evelyn is hereby called upon, whether she likes it or not, to help protect the multiverse from total annihilation. So the film pretty much swept the 95th Academy Awards last year. We were talking about earlier, winning Best Picture, Best Actress for Yeoh, Best Supporting Actor for Kwan, Best Director or Directors, Best Screenplay, and many others, right? So many people love this film, public audiences and critics alike. So I think we should start there, if you don't mind. So I'd love to just hear, Bowen, why you chose this movie to talk about today. So basically, what do you love about this film? If you love this film, do you love it? And what are your interests in it? And that can be from an academic perspective or just, as a fan or as a viewer.
That's a really big question. I feel like, yes, I do love this movie. Number one, that has to be said. And I think there are some ambiguities about how I feel about it, which, maybe we'll get into later. But at the end of the day, I think it's kind of this blend of the personal and the academic for me because I interpret verse jumping as this metaphor for intertextuality. And, it's fun to approach that from this very academic English literary criticism sense. But I think the movie also just makes us think about intertextuality in this everyday context.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah. So when you're thinking about, the way that it is a metaphor for intertextuality, what are you thinking about in terms of, I think maybe just because we were talking about it a little bit earlier and it kind of just comes to mind, right? Are you thinking about genre and in terms of this kind of cross genre or seemingly cross-generic kind of engagement that this film is kind of taking on? Are you thinking about genre? Yeah, in terms of intertextuality, but also are you thinking about the other films maybe that are mentioned in the movie or parodied, right? Like Ratatouille is Ratatouille.
Yes, Ratatouille, yes.
Yeah.
Both, for sure.
Yeah.
I like the general plays on genres, like the Kung Fu movie, the wuxia movie. But then they also have those very specific references too, like Ratatouille, or even what's the one Dr. Seuss book that they parody? The
Oh.
Places You'll Go. Yeah, if you remember that, but it's a black and white cover, and it's everything everywhere all at once on top of it instead. And I feel like there's so many moments where these absurd things are happening, and the characters, especially Evelyn, they have to make these intertextual connections in order to make sense of what's going on. And I think that's just really, it's really interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. Yeah, I actually don't remember that moment where they show the book.
It's actually, if you want to grab one of
Or
those.
maybe, which one is it? Why were they face down? It's a surprise.
Oh, I think they fell over.
Oh, I thought they just.
Yeah,
Is
it's
it
this
this one?
scene. Yeah. It's like she's showing Evelyn the bagel. And then as they're approaching it, she just pulls out this Everything Everywhere All at Once book.
Oh,
but in the
okay.
style of Dr. Seuss.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I must have, missed that part. That's funny, though. Maybe I do remember that. And, okay. I vaguely remember. I didn't know it was in this. This is a very interesting book as well to pick, right? It's like the
Yes.
children's book that's supposed to be like inspirational and kind of like
Yes.
optimistic and like you can be anything, right? Like you can do
Yes.
anything, go anywhere. And then this context I think is really interesting. Maybe we could talk about that as kind of like their relationship, right? Or even like Evelyn's relationships. I don't know. Do you want to start there perhaps? Like just talking about the kind of like family unit that they have.
Yeah, sure.
And like, how that's sort of, fitting into, and then how maybe it's also sort of like broken up by or like being constructed by the concept of the multiverse too, like the way the family is kind of like splintered and yet kind of like again like everywhere at the same time, different versions of themselves, all doing different things and having like kind of certainly not different or like incongruous pursuits in each universe, but
Right.
they perhaps seem that way, but they're all sort of, even though they are different consciousnesses, different like versions of themselves, they are all kind of working toward individually, the same like objective, whether it's like Joy, right, or like Waymond, and maybe even Evelyn. Yeah, for sure. Maybe
That's
the,
really
the grandfather maybe less spoken for, but
Right.
yeah. I don't know where I just had that thought just now, so I don't really know where to go with that, but
Yeah. Well, I do think it's interesting how, even though, yes, like the Wong family is at the center of this film, there are also these really important universes where the Wong family actually just doesn't exist, Like there's the universe where Evelyn and Deirdre are a couple. In the Rakakuni universe, Chef Evelyn.
Right. That's true.
Just we never see her family at all.
Right.
Yeah. So
That's a good point.
But it's interesting that those universes are still important to Evelyn herself and her journey. I mean, this isn't a very deep point to make, but I think part of the movie is also about how you exist as your own individual person within a family unit too. Yeah. And how you like maintain your own just individual identity.
Sure.
That-
Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah. It's not that like the other versions of herself are necessarily incongruous with like the main Evelyn, which is also like I think brings up the point of that you mentioned like earlier before this, the concept of like the Alphaverse being the universe that is kind of like not the primordial one, but definitely like the primary one.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But also, it isn't for the sake of like the narrative, right? It's not the primary. The one that we're focused on is she's just Evelyn.
Yeah.
And then there's Alpha Evelyn. Yeah.
That's right. Actually, and now that you've brought up the Alphaverse, I think maybe the more interesting thing to think about with family is like the idea of sacrifice, because that's a very common theme that comes up in Asian American literature and stuff, right? Like sacrifice. But I think the film kind of asks you to rethink what it means to sacrifice anything for family, or just to directly sacrifice your family, with the Alphaverse wanting to basically kill every iteration of Joy, and even of Evelyn potentially, right? Alpha Gong Gong wants to kill all of the Joys in every multiverse, and then once he thinks that the main universe Evelyn just isn't up to the task of defeating Jobu Tupaki, he decides I have to kill her too. Which is, just this spin on like not sacrificing anything for your family necessarily, but sacrificing your family, for some supposed greater good, which the film actually kind of rejects.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so too. Because it's interesting. in the framing of like what it means to like have like potential, which I think is like a lot of like obviously what Evelyn's father is like seeing on a surface level that like this Evelyn has no potential, right? To
Right.
you know to carry out like the tasks like in service of this greater good, which is to save the multiverse essentially.
Right.
And so so that kind of like just delimits like where she's able to go, or like what she's able to accomplish. But
yeah, that's true.
Yeah, but
sacrifice almost structures mobility in the movie.
Yeah. But it's interesting, because like that kind of potential is of course like seen as that potential is foreclosed, but it's actually it's made to be foreclosed, right? But it's actually not.
Right.
And it also I think speaks to I mean, the very obvious thing is like the intergenerational trauma of like children, and vice versa, right? Expectations of parents, like how are they, what's the right way to, care for, show affection for, and like, reciprocate love, which is a big thing with like Joy and Evelyn. Yeah.
Right. It all points back to the moment when Evelyn and Waymond leave China, because that's the moment in which Gong Gong, right, like just.
Oh, right.
Like lets them go and cuts off ties with them too. Yeah.
Right.
And that's like this the moment, the beginning moment for the film of this intergenerational trauma, of this really damaging version of sacrifice, you know. And it ties back to I think what you were saying about mobility, but just within one universe, right? Like in a way that movement across the Pacific, that immigration from China to the U.S. is like this multiversal jump that that Gong Gong is trying to limit, but which Evelyn, refuses to accept as a limit. Yeah.
Oh, that's really interesting. Yeah. What was that just making me think of?
I don't know.
I don't know either. Yeah. It is interesting. It's almost like, to come back to like this concept of like the multiverse, not just like within the film, but like, the greater like kind of statements maybe the film is trying to make about like, about potential and about like the different possible like or infinite universes. It's interesting to think about, what that would mean in relationship to like how we think about, like potential as being like actualized, right? Because like that's the whole point, is that every decision actually becomes a reality. And it's maybe less of a thought experiment, just like about what are all the things that are possible, perhaps alluding again to like the Dr. Seuss, like
right
the places you'll go. But it seems more to be like a practice in at least like entertaining the possibility of like what is possible.
That's actually really interesting, because that makes me think of one of the maybe more technical contradictions in the movie. These two different visions of what the multiverse is, because Jobu Tupaki says that everything is with statistical inevitability, right? But then, as you just alluded to earlier, Waymond says, right, that every decision that you make creates another branching universe, right? And to me, those are actually like physically, mathematically contradictory to one another.
Okay.
Yeah. But it's interesting that they coexist in the same movie.
Can you explain maybe a little bit how they are contradictory in a mathematical
like
sense?
Joy's version where everything is a statistical inevitability,
right?
And it's just this, like she says that everything is just this like collection of particles, right? Like vibrating in some combination.
Sure.
Like that makes me think of and it's not a good theory, but like Laplace's demon, like the idea that if there's this demon that knows the position and energy of every particle in the universe, that demon can then mathematically predict what's going to happen next, what came before, because it's just all these physical equations. In which case, it's not even about like statistics and probability. It's just fully mathematically predetermined.
Sure.
And there's actually like no room for variation at all, because everything is just.
Okay. Got it.
In a way, it is a statistical inevitability. In a way. In a way, it is a statistical inevitability. Oh my God. Please leave all of
The
that.
way your face looks.
Leave all of that in. Don't cut any of this. This is, wow.
This is material. Yeah, this is
Yes,
content.
absolutely. It is a statistical inevitability.
Yeah.
There we go. Because every event is just 100%.
I see. Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
bound to occur. But on the other hand, right, Wayman's version of the multiverse says, actually, no, like we actually do have free will, basically. And
I see. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
one of those, right, like Joy's or Alpha Joy's
Yeah.
perception of the universe is that it's, like any possibility is almost kind of like precluded by like the nature of the universe, right? Like
Right.
limitless possibility, like it's
Right.
not. But on the contrary, yeah.
I think the basic answer is that it links both concepts of the multiverse into the same existential dread, which I think we've also talked about a bit before this podcast. You know, either like limitless possibility is just overwhelming and then making you seem insignificant because,
Sure.
you know, like you're just frozen. Like, what do I do? Versus just, oh, everything's already predetermined, so why does any of it matter? You know, like I think both sort of feed into the same existential dread that Jobu Tupaki embodies or represents.
Yeah.
You know?
Well,
Yeah.
sort of to jump back to like thinking about like cross genre like play, which is a really interesting thing I think to think about beyond the borders of like just like Western film, because I think that genre scenes, you might have more information about, or you probably, I'm sure you do, about like any kind of like Eastern or like or maybe specifically Chinese cinema, like the way that genres are kind of like defined there, but at least like right in the kind of the Western like understanding of and traditional like film theory that thinks about like genre, they seem, it's so different, I think, at least in how they're like constructed and how, not to mention like how people like receive genre. But yeah, could you maybe talk about then like the genres that I think you mentioned a couple earlier that this is like building on, obviously the Kung Fu film, but perhaps films that are not particularly like canonical to like Western cinema. What genre? Yeah, I thought you mentioned a couple.
Yeah.
And where you like see those working here and how you see those working here perhaps.
Well, the genres that I mentioned earlier, I think were Kung Fu and Wuxia, which are similar, like just like the martial arts genre. Yeah.
Okay.
Those interest me because they feed back, I think, into like actually star dynamics and Hollywood and Hong Kong and cinema, because to me they raise questions of like Evelyn versus Michelle Yeoh, you know, the universe in which she is that martial arts actor,
right?
Like that's very much drawn on Michelle Yeoh's that's very much drawing on Michelle Yeoh's own life,
right?
And it sort of breaks the fourth wall a little bit, you know, like it's weird because it is this intergeneric connection, but then it's also this film world, real world connection, which, you know, I think is meant to suggest, oh, like our world is part of this multiverse, right?
Sure. Yeah.
A little bit. I mean, they even use archival footage of Michelle Yeoh at the premiere for Crazy Rich Asians at one point.
Do they?
Yeah, they do.
Was that okay?
Yeah. Which is and like
I didn't know that.
If you freeze the frame, it's like it's
Sure.
really visible that like it's Crazy Rich Asians written behind her.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So like at that point, it's not even like maybe she's like Michelle Yeoh in that universe. It's almost like she is just Michelle Yeoh.
Yes.
In that universe.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that. Yeah, that was there. Yeah. Apparently, there's a lot of things I didn't actually see in this movie.
But I think what I'll also say then about like the martial arts genre is that you're right. They are like maybe unfamiliar to Western audiences or to Hollywood, but at the same time, they're also being spoofed and they're being defamiliarized to maybe Asian audiences or to just people, you know, who like those movies. There's regular, I think, satire just with the way that they strike those crazy poses, you know, and the action is a little over the top, you know, like using a fanny pack as a weapon or like using
Yeah.
a dog as a weapon, you know?
Oh
which was-
God, yeah, that's
Yeah.
yeah,
That was
a little bit hard to. I
really
mean, it was very not real. Like, so
it was not real.
It was,
and
yeah.
then the moment after she like clips the leash and the dog goes flying,
Yeah,
you do hear the dog like make a noise
Sure.
to signify that the dog is okay. So I just want to point that out.
okay, yeah.
I'm assuming
I mean,
it's to
is it-
signify that the dog is okay.
Like the dog makes a noise, it's in like a cry of pain. Like, is that signifying that he's okay?
I don't think
or
it was a cry of
where,
pain.
Okay, like it's
Yeah.
just like a bark. Like
Yeah, just
later
like
on.
a little yell, like oh, you know, yeah.
Okay.
I don't
yeah.
think it was a cry of pain.
Okay,
I might have to
all
go
right.
back and
Yeah.
re-listen to
I
it.
mean, we can't see. Yeah, we don't know. Yeah.
That's true.
But-
Well, you know, in post, I'll go back and re-listen to that scene, and
Yeah.
then you can in post just confirm.
no, that's fine. Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
that is a trope. Yeah, of like
yeah. Just making sure
confirming
that,
like
you know,
someone's like okay by
Yes.
just like
yes,
yeah, even
no
if they're
animals
off-
were harmed in the making.
Yeah,
of this
even if they're
film.
off like camera. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
What was my point?
Uh,
Oh, just like yeah, that type of stuff defamiliarizes that
okay.
that genre. I think to everyone a little bit.
Mhm.
The pose that Jobu strikes when the security guard, she's just taken out those police officers,
Yeah.
and then the final security guard comes at her with a baton, and she turns it into a dildo.
That's
And then,
right.
yeah, like after
Two,
she
I
two
thought. Yeah,
dildos.
she's
Yeah,
got two.
I don't know where the
She's
second one
dual
comes from.
wielding.
Actually,
I don't
Dual
know either. All of
wielding.
a sudden, yeah, they were just both there.
Yeah, like she had one, and then just
Mm-hmm.
after she like clobbers him with both,
Yeah.
she strikes that like really ridiculous pose.
Yes, yeah.
like holding both of them in the air.
Right.
And we don't have to get very psychoanalytic, right? But that's a very like
Right.
Freudian,
Sure.
deconstruction of weapons and martial arts. And
Yeah.
stuff. Yeah. So
Yeah, that's true. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's an interesting kind of, if you want to call it a parody, a little bit. Yeah.
A
in that
little bit,
moment,
maybe. Yeah.
Perhaps. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, if we're gonna just if we're gonna, address the elephant in the room, if we just touch the elephant in the room, what if we
Touch
just
elephant.
touched it?
Well, that's a very like Buddhist metaphor, right? Like we're all touching the elephant from different angles, but none
Yeah.
of us can see the elephant. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. Is that true?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like the parable, the story of like
Uh-huh.
different blind people like all like feeling an elephant, and
Oh.
they're like, oh, this is the trunk, right? Like the
Oh, okay.
elephant is very much like a snake, but like no, it's not.
Oh,
or like
I know this. Yeah.
or like the
Mhm.
leg, it's like a tree or
Right.
something. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Oh, that's funny.
but
yeah.
they're all wrong. Yeah.
They're all wrong. That's the moral there. Yeah. Well, I wasn't going to go that direction, but that
Oh,
was
okay.
interesting. Yeah, I was going to say if we're going to touch the elephant in the room,
Okay.
yeah, with our eyes open, we could perhaps talk a little bit about, like the psychoanalysis of, not even the psychoanalysis, but like the psychoanalytic kind of like approach to thinking about the like this like meta nature of the film, and like what things that are like extra filmic that become like intra filmic, right? Like you're
Yeah.
saying, like the Michelle Yeoh's like presence at the premiere, was it, of Crazy Rich Asians?
Yes. Yeah.
So yeah, this stuff that is like very much extra filmic, like becoming part of the film and part of the like world building of the film.
Right.
But I am interested, in the kind of moments where the film seems to break the fourth wall. That's probably one of the moments where you could definitely say that. And then there's the other moment, like quite literally, where I feel like the fourth wall sort of gets broken. But it's fourth wall like adjacent. I don't know if it's quite that. I think it's something a little bit more interesting than that. But and we talked about this before. But the scene where I'm forgetting her name, Jamie Lee Curtis's character.
Deirdre.
Deirdre, that's
Yes.
right. Yeah, but she shows up at the laundromat, right?
Yes,
at
yes,
And
yes.
this is kind of like, toward the end
Yes.
of the
Yes.
film.
Yeah.
And Evelyn basically like she's looking at the camera. She's looking through the window of her laundromat.
Yes.
Right.
She's approaching with the baseball bat.
Pretty much.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And she comes straight on and says like,
Yeah.
I've always hated this place, I think is what she says.
Yeah,
And then
yeah.
smashes the window. And what you get is you don't get the framing of the window. It's only the frame of the actual camera.
Right.
And you don't see the edges of the window. And then she
Yeah.
smashes the glass.
Yeah.
So moments like, I am interested in, the kind of like perhaps meta filmic, if we want to say that. Moments. And if you have any, not really a question, but what are your thoughts, I guess, on the nature of, just kind of engaging with what is extra filmic and what is intrafilmic, and how those things are working to maybe like world build in this, but also perhaps it seems like it's trying to like reach out and world build also like like our reality of like understanding how film is like circulated and kind of right like interpolated. Especially with the concept of like the premiere, and not just the premiere, but like it's her like movie life, right? Like or her life as an actress. That's sort of touched on there.
Well, one of the other like metafilmic moments that I am thinking of, but also may not be relevant, like the false ending in the middle of the movie.
Yes. Yeah.
After we think main Evelyn has died, and it just cuts to the
it's like
the
barely
credits.
at the end of Act 1 almost.
Right.
Which is an interesting.
Yeah, exactly. And then it like zooms
Timing.
out from the end credits, and we realize, oh no, it's just the end credits of like the premiere that martial arts Evelyn is watching, in wherever. Which I think ties back then, into the idea of like Evelyn as Michelle Yeoh as well, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, the kind of reaching out that I think the film does, even with that moment, right?
Yeah,
where things stay within the film, but it kind of brings up that like the play between like film time and movie time, right? Like the actual runtime of the film, as opposed to like the time that is passing within the film.
Yeah.
I feel like that scene is doing something really interesting with, or that like whole sequence is doing something interesting with like, or playing with like, I guess like toying with our expectations of like kind of, and I complain about this a lot, like how long a movie should be, or like the standard runtime of a film.
Right.
Because we know that, we know that sensing that it is like toward the end of Act 1, we know that, okay, this doesn't feel right. It can't be over yet. We know it's not over, right? So it's an interesting kind of play that they do there, which is not like original to them, right? Like other films have done that,
right?
But within the larger context of like trying to talk about and like visualize the multiverse, essentially, it's an interesting play there, I think, with time.
It is, yeah, and I think psychoanalytically, because I think that was part of your question.
Oh yeah, it was somewhere in there.
it was
got away.
Thrown in there.
Yeah, we let go of the elephant, I think.
Well, the nice thing is that I don't want to go back into Freud, because I hate Freud. But psychoanalytically, it's this refusal to allow the audience to sort of like dissociate, I think. I was watching, I think it was a Christopher Nolan interview, and he said something like, I never want my audience to like remember that they're watching a film.
Who said that? Sorry.
Christopher Nolan.
Okay.
He said something about how
I heard like Orson Welles for some reason.
Orson Welles.
Like just now, I was like,
no.
I mean, I wouldn't put
I
wouldn't put it past Orson Welles.
But,
okay. Anyway, yeah.
I remember he
Nolan
was talking
said
with Stephen Colbert about Oppenheimer. This was actually very
Oh,
recent.
interesting. Okay, yeah.
And Stephen Colbert was saying something about, like, I didn't even notice that you switch between black and white and color. And Christopher Nolan was like, oh, thank you. Like, that's really...
Yes.
Imagine this in a British accent.
Of course.
Like, he was like, thank you. I actually don't want my audience to be reminded of the fact that they're watching a movie, right? And if you had noticed, I think that would have reminded you, But I think this film has the complete opposite philosophy, where, like, at every point in time, at every step, we're constantly being reminded that, oh, we're watching a movie, right? This is very much an artistic and aesthetic product.
Yeah.
And yeah, there's this refusal to like allow the audience to just fully imagine the world as fictional and to be immersed in this world as fictional, and to constantly think about how, oh, like, does this, like, number one, is the fourth wall broken? Does it sort of spill over? But then psychoanalytically also, from like an Asian American psychoanalysis standpoint, it makes me think a bit about David Eng and Shin Hee Han's Racial Melancholia, Racial Dissociation book. The racial melancholia, the racial dissociation in the film, like, spills over. I think maybe what I'm trying to say is that, like, racial melancholia, according to David Eng and Shin Hee Han, is about loss and exclusion. Like the loss of whiteness, the loss of like Asian culture itself, exclusion from both as well. But the film is actually kind of doing the opposite in breaking the fourth wall. The film is always including you as the viewer, as an audience member, into its its world, its tensions, its
Okay,
yeah.
yeah.
It's this interesting on the audience. It's this interesting reversal of loss and
Yeah.
exclusion. Yeah, even as the
Okay.
characters themselves experience racial melancholia.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's interesting.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to think about, of course, like the conscious and unconscious, like with viewership as well as you're talking about, because like as the audience member, you're often considered to be like quite passive, right? But your point is
Right.
that being included as the audience, right, is a way to subvert that kind of audience like film expectation that the film is the active voice and the actant,
Right.
and the
Right.
audience member is the passive sort of um, the passive subject that just perceives alone. So I think that's an interesting thing, to think about this idea of like them watching themselves and like surveilling themselves and their other versions of themselves in other universes,
Right. Right.
right? And like whether that's a passive thing or an active thing. So I think there's a kind of like mirroring going on between like the audience in the film and then also the characters and their universes, right? And the way that
Right.
they're perceiving them as sometimes active, sometimes passive, and it's always a bit of a blurring, right? It's never quite.
Right.
There's a slippage all the time between whether they're active in one universe or the other,
Right. Right.
whether they're just watching themselves, watching things happen, like kind of Alpha Joy would be suggesting, right? Is that
Right.
all you can do is just kind of sit in the universes and like
Right.
only see half of what's going on at any time because you're everywhere, right? You're
Yes.
everywhere all at once. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's really interesting, and it actually I think maybe leads a bit into Taoism actually, with the stereotype of is Taoism about passivity or
Yeah, that's
or
interesting.
what does passivity mean? And there's the very stereotypical idea of like just don't do anything and be zen and let things happen to you, which is not accurate.
Sure.
But I think I'm going to tie this back to
Yeah.
what we were saying earlier about the martial arts genre.
Yeah.
And even though it is this like visual parody or spoof of the martial arts genre, I'm now thinking that the film actually stays quite true to like typical traditional martial arts philosophy
Okay.
of like action through redirection or like not necessarily being completely passive, but like not being active in a purely aggressive way, right? At the very end of the movie, when Evelyn, puts the Google eye on her forehead, and becomes, this sort of like all-seeing being. To me, like that's sort of a reference to the Bodhisattva, Guan Yin or like Avalokiteshvara, in Chinese or in Sanskrit, like the one who observes all. In Chinese specifically, the one who hears all the sounds of the world.
Oh, okay.
And that's literally what she's doing, right? Like not just all the sounds of the world, but of the whole multiverse.
Yeah.
And instead of acting on all of those sounds in some aggressive way, like she literally says to Wayman, right? Like I'm learning to fight the way you fight, right? Not through this aggressive, martial arts.
Sure.
Kicking, punching, attacking thing.
Yeah.
But through like the redirection of everyone's fears and insecurities and psychoses actually, right? Into something positive, like turning their like their negativity into something that actually can be fulfilled and satisfied.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that.
I hope that starts to answer the question.
No,
a
I
little
like
bit.
that. Yeah. We could take that and maybe, close with like one final question then, because I think that's really interesting to think about in context of just the fact that the entire narrative is like framed around this encounter at like the IRS, right? How they first get to the IRS and like what the problem is, which is like the audit and everything, and then how it ends, right? On a happier note, it's still at the IRS.
Still at the IRS, yes.
Which is very interesting. And we talked a little bit about like the saying that whoever said it, what did we say? Ben Franklin said it. Yeah, the only two things that are certain in life or whatever,
death and
are
taxes.
Death and taxes.
Yeah.
And so that's very funny too, and a bit ironic, I think, also. But is it ironic? I guess is the question. Yeah, when you have that kind of framing that is quite stereotypically Americanized, right? It's the IRS, right? It's taxes. Yeah.
Yes.
What do you think is going on there? I guess in the way that it's all kind of bracketed by that.
Well, I just did my taxes over the weekend.
Well, there you go. Yeah. So you're quite familiar. Yeah.
Unfortunately, yes. TurboTax saved my life. The idea of a financially struggling Asian American family is interesting because it counters the model minority myth.
Yeah.
You know, but at the end of the day, the film, it ends on this note of like, you know, you're still participating in this American system, right? As you said, like this capitalistic system in which, you know, as a citizen, you're paying your taxes, you know,
Sure.
You're navigating what it means to like have a business, you know.
Right.
But on the other hand, I think the film sort of points out how absurd it all is.
Yeah.
You know, like how weird is it that you're just sitting there in some IRS agent's cubicle, right, talking about your taxes, and she's like, why is there a karaoke machine on this receipt?
Yeah.
And behind her are like 3 butt plug trophies.
Yeah.
And, you know, and she just, you know, like it's just so absurd in this defamiliarizing way that you know, you do, I think, like question a little bit, like, what is the point of all of this?
All of
right?
this is so insignificant in the grand scheme of things, right? But at the same time, I think that also points to the possibilities of anything being absurd being able to generate both like positive and negative like affects. So like, of course, you can look at it in the way that Alpha Joy does.
Right.
But the other side of that is, kind of recognizing the potential and like specialness of like the everyday, and and what is mundane and seems very unspecial when you defamiliarize it can become special and spectacular.
But on the other hand, and I like what you're saying and I agree with what you're saying, but now I'm also thinking that like, even though all of that is true, at the end of the movie, Evelyn still escapes from the mundane, right? She's sitting there in the booth, and Deirdre is like, yes, everything is better, but there's still a problem with the Schedule C. But at that moment, like Evelyn slips away into the other multiverses, and she briefly like flashes to all the other ones, you know, and she allows herself to be pulled away and distracted, you know, before she comes back and he's like, I'm sorry, could you say that again? You know? So, you know, even though, yes, it does end at the IRS, it's not, the film isn't saying, you know, you're back at the IRS.
Oh, yeah, I like
pay
that.
attention to your taxes. You know, do your Schedule C correctly. The film still allows you to sort of, you know, fly away from.
And I don't even think that's like contradictory to those different like avenues of like potential. Like it's to say, even when that is the life that you've chosen, the universe that you've chosen, which is like what Alpha Evelyn, I think, said it, or Alpha Joy or Alpha Evelyn said that when they had that conversation. That, you know, the heartfelt conversation at the end where it's like, why did you choose this universe? Why pick this one when, you know, you have all these other versions of you that you could be, or essentially, is what Alpha Joy is asking. And yet, like in that, even in choosing that universe, this one, which is the main one for our sake, she still finds ways to not necessarily like escape it. I don't see it as like an escapism, that moment of like going to others. I feel like it's more just like an acknowledgement, like an acknowledgement of what else is possible, and yet I've chosen to be here.
Oh, interesting.
And I think it could be either. It could be either.
It could be either,
I think that's what's interesting maybe most about the film, is that it kind of allows both of those things to coexist. Or like, it's, again, setting up these binaries, but to say, are they binaries or are they... Can it be everything everywhere all at once?
Yes, that's true. That's true. Yeah, I love that. I will say that after that scene ends and, you know, the title of the movie comes up, everything everywhere all at once. The 4 Chinese characters that show up behind it, Tianma Xinghong. It's this like Chinese idiom that like literally means like, you know, the horses of heaven gallop in the skies. You know, but it describes like living freely without restraint, and it can be taken positively or negatively. It's, you're either like really unrestrained and crazy, you know, and like wild and tone it down, or like you're just living life in a very like carefree way, or you're doing what you want and you're very self-possessed, and it's, you know, it can be a positive thing too. But
it's all about like the subjective understanding of however you decide to perceive that.
Exactly. Like, what does it mean to you to be a heavenly horse?
I like that. I like that. Yeah. Again, it just speaks to like just the potential, right? Like of what this film was trying to say and like do with how we experience our own lives and our own subjectivities at any given time.
I like that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Well, great. Yeah. I think that's all the time we have. But thank you so much, Bowen, for talking with us about this movie. Very fascinating movie. I do really love it as well. And
I'm glad.
Yeah. And I've cried. Yeah.
That's true.
I
I never
cried
asked.
watching
Did you love it
I
as well?
did enjoy it. Yeah.
Okay,
I really
okay.
liked it. Yeah. Of course. Yeah. We have a couple. Yeah. We didn't even have really any criticisms. I don't think like that were especially harsh. Yeah. Great film. We do recommend it. Yeah. But really interesting one to think about as well. So.
Indeed. Yeah. Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah. All right. And we will see you next time on WAC.